And button two. Great. All right. I'm digging this 2-on-1 action. This is like, a really yummy emotional conversation threesome conversation that we get to have. I mean, I feel like I would like to have my husband here for this conversation, but also maybe I will get the codes and then
Oh,
I will go back into our relationship and then I'll be like a ninja and
there
I'll
you
just like lay it on him and do this little thing here and this little thing there and see if he can pick up what I'm putting down, and maybe we'll be even more emotionally connected, have
go.
even better sex after having this conversation with the two of you. Glenn and Phyllis, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh my
Love it.
goodness.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. It's definitely one of our favorite topics and reflects our relationship for
Mm,
sure. And, I love that. I love the idea that you're out there, you're talking about that
yeah.
topic that a lot of people don't talk about and
Mm,
don't know where to turn to talk about it, and
yeah.
if you Google it, you're in trouble.
Mm.
You go down some crazy places. So I love it that you are out there making a difference because people
Yeah.
really need to have a safe place to go and consume content like this. So thank you, Alexa.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. So if you were imagining someone just Googling without,
Phew.
like what would they put in the Google machine?
Mm.
Exactly. I
You
mean,
know?
how crazy is that? Right.
Yeah, no, that's actually a question I have. What do you think if someone was finding themselves challenged in their relationship in some regard, or sex in some regard? What do you think they'd Google? And what do you think they'd find?
Oh my goodness.
I mean, ideally, they're probably Googling something like sexual connection, but and I always say that every website is 4 steps from a porn site. So, I'm not even concerned about that, except you just don't know where it's going to lead you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
people are looking typically for dynamic connection. They want relational connection. That's where the greatest sexual connection is built. And so there's just no telling where it will take them. And so, part of the problem, we always say there's an upside and a downside to everything with the internet, is you Google something and you get 7.3 million returns on it. Well,
Hmm.
how the heck are you going to sort through that? And to figure out what's valuable and what's not, what's
Yeah.
beneficial and what's not. So I just love your podcast and what you're doing, that it helps people to actually find what they're looking for that will really be a benefit to them.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I would imagine, just in the times when I've done research, and I use air quotes, research, if I'm like looking for a fact or a piece of information that maybe I've heard at some point or I read in a book and I'm trying to figure out who to credit for it or something, and I just go to Google and I start typing things. And the thing is that Google is, and just like search engines are bought and paid for by advertising
Yeah.
agencies. And so, at the top, search engine results would be like Healthline and Women's Magazine and Women's Health Magazine and Elle and all these like pop culture um, publications or online publications that are a lot of times people who are writing, but they're writing to get clicks and they're writing to get views, and it's not fact checked, and they don't have to have scientific medical,
Yeah.
they don't have to have that basis behind what they write. And if they find someone who they deem as a credible source to be able to quote, they can chop the thing up and take it out of context and build some words around it and make it kind of fluffy and then put it out there. And then is it actually going to serve people or not? And a lot of times getting a response, it's like a how to give a
Mm.
better blowjob, or how to, spice it up in the bedroom or whatever. And a lot of times the how to's are giving very tactical, practical, like this technique, bring this toy in, do this thing. And what they're really missing, and I understand it's hard to communicate in that kind of format, but what they're really missing is the emotional stuff, is the heavily nuanced conversations that are required in order to make these things that they are suggesting viable options and
Yeah.
not just opportunities for people to, bring in more judgment, shame, blame, make wrong, hurt, rejection, all of the above. So I'm
Yeah.
also grateful we've got the podcast too, because then we can kind of like soften that up. And hopefully, if you dig around on a search engine results several pages in, you might get to our show. I don't know. We're working on it. SEO is a thing. We've got a site that is also still probably a few clicks away from porn, but educational. nonetheless,
Yeah.
with who we affiliate with. But and I love that we have the podcast, because then we can bring people in real relationships that are also doing the work, that this stuff really matters to them. We can bring people like you guys, or the both of you, onto the show to have, an even more in-depth, longer form conversation on the subject, so that people can really truly take it in and implement those changes.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that we're centuries into miseducation. So this is not a new development. It's
Right.
just so much content is available now, but people have been misinformed for a very, very long time. So it's not like, well, my parents' generation was on point and now we got all messed up because of Google. Not at all. The
Oh
miseducation
no.
so damaged for many, many years.
Yeah.
Right.
I think about just what does educate us when we're young. It's either through something within our family structure where we get some kind of messaging about sex or about who we are as sexual beings. And, we definitely grew up in a time, for the listeners who don't know, we're, in our 60s, we've been married 40 years. And we kind of grew up where it was really shamed. I mean, it just was not talked about.
Right.
And it was kind of understood that you would just figure it out. Like sex is easy. You'll get it. It's, it's so natural. You'll have, right off the bat, amazing orgasms and, all that. And of course, we learned the hard way that that's not true at all. And so for us, we started off just so devastated that sex was not easy. And for me, it just became like, I couldn't even talk about it. Like it was so negative for me coming off the honeymoon, that I was just like, man, I just don't even know what just happened. And there was no one to talk to, because no one had talked to me before. And so there was just a lot of years of silence over it. And of course, back then there were no things like podcasts, and very few books that were written, and found pretty quickly that a lot of books were just not at all helpful for me. And so over the years, we figured it out and began to just start talking about it, simply not because it was easy to talk about back then, but it was such a necessity. We saw people all around us struggling, and it's like, no one's willing to talk about this. This is crazy. And so we began talking about it, and it's kind of a long journey, but I feel like we eventually figured out how to have great sex, but we knew there was still something missing. And that's, when Glenn was working on his doctorate to become a sexologist, it's like through the years of that, being back in school, having time, is when he started doing a ton of research that led him down the road of understanding what we really disconnect over. Because we always thought it was, well, we fight because of sex. Sex was our number one thing we fought about. And it was kind of like, once we stopped fighting about it, we still realized, wow, there's still something really missing here. And that's where the emotional connection piece came in. And that's what Glenn, just a ton of research went into that. And then eventually we wrote a book, and then now we've created master classes over the topic of just emotional connection, because to have just dynamic sexual connection, you got to have emotional connection, deep emotional connection.
Yeah, and for the record, let me make sure I point out that our first sexual encounter together was the greatest 11 seconds of my life. So I did not understand what Phyllis was so annoyed about. I had no idea she was an ungrateful.
That's his go-to, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
That's his go-to. I don't know what she's talking about. It's the greatest 11 seconds of my life. It's a good one.
This is amazing. Let's do it again soon.
Right, let's do it again soon.
Sadly, that set us up for many, many years, because again, we were faith-based then, very conservative, and so we had not been involved sexually. We'd never put tab A into slot B, and so that was our first time. And what it communicated to her psyche is, well, that's what sex equals. And for some bizarre reason, she was not interested from that point forward. And we spent 20 years in that kind of, and it was a slow evolution. We got better at sexual activity, but we still didn't understand how to connect emotionally and therefore sexually. And that's what has changed so drastically for us.
Yeah, for us, we had this huge turning point moment, which of course in the moment, we didn't know this was going to be the moment, right? But it was kind of a scenario that occurred often between us. So it was one of those. I was in the kitchen. I was about to unload the dishwasher, open the dishwasher. It was already unloaded. So I turned to Glenn and I said, "Hey, babe, thanks for unloading the dishwasher." And he responded not with "you're welcome," but he responded with a snarky, "Well, that's not the only thing I've done today."
Which is how I typically
Yeah.
respond to
And
something of that
so
nature.
typically then I would go, either a snarky response back, roll my eyes and be like, "Oh my gosh, can't you just say you're welcome? Like for once, can't you say you're welcome?" But that was our interaction over and over. But that particular day, that particular moment in our day, and that was probably 20 years in, I decided I wasn't going to roll my eyes. I wasn't going to respond with a snarky response. I was going to become curious. And so I said to him, "What do you hear me say when I say thank you for unloading the dishwasher? And what happens for you when I say thank you for unloading the dishwasher?" And I was really stunned by his response.
Yeah, I just happen to live with one of the most productive people on the planet. She happens to live with one of the lesser productive people on the planet. A lot of fun to have around, but I do struggle getting things done. So when she would say that, I thought her point was it's a miracle that Glenn did something worthwhile for a change. He's such a lazy, useless sluggard, and wow, everybody celebrate, call the internet, throw some confetti that he did something useful. Many, many, many years later, we now understand what was happening there because the brain doesn't distinguish physical pain from emotional pain. So what was happening for me, not based on what Phyllis was doing as far as her intention, but based on what was happening for me, she had just punched me in the face. Well, now I don't want to be around her. I don't want to be connected with her because she's dangerous. She's a pain source. And again, this has nothing to do with Phyllis, even though it's all about Phyllis. This is about what was happening for me. And what happens for couples, for either party or both parties, they wound each other so extensively, so many times during the course of the day. And then typically, not always, but typically for the man, then, whatever, 8 o'clock at night, he's like, "Hey, babe, you want to get down and dirty?" And she's bleeding, she's wounded, she's damaged from all of the things that he said and did that day. And so she's like, "No, you're a pain source." And of course, she doesn't know that. She's unable to verbalize that. And it can very much be vice versa as well. There are many, many men. The erectile dysfunction industry is $1 billion industry. And this problem is that it works. You can actually drug someone and get them to have an erection, but that does not mean that they're going to have sexual connection at all. Just they're going to have sexual activity. And once we understand that if we have all this emotional wounding, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to connect sexually. Again, we can have sexual activity, but not a sexual connection.
And so for us, the reason that was such a huge turning point is because I, for the first time, understood that here, I always thought it was logistics. If we could just get all the logistics right, then we won't fight anymore. Yeah. And in that moment, I thought, oh my word, what he experiences in his head is so different than what I am trying to communicate or what I'm experiencing in my head. And so I realized this is not about logistics. This is about emotion. This is about what's happening for him emotionally when I say thank you for unloading the dishwasher. And when I began to just understand that, then I was able, like when we would have an interaction and his response would seem kind of off to me, I was able to go, "Hey, what's happening for you?" And then he would slow himself down to go, "Well, that just really hurt." And then I was able to hear that and not take judgment upon myself, not feel blamed, but simply, wow, thank you actually that's not a positive for you. That's a negative for you. You think I'm making fun of you. And I'm genuinely thankful that you unloaded the dishwasher. And so we started in that moment communicating in a really different way. And because that was such a huge turning point for us, and that became very common, that kind of language, that played in a lot to Glenn's research and kind of going down that whole road of emotion, which, to be honest, I knew very little about. Like, I thought you choose your emotions. You get up in the morning and go, "Hey, I'm going to just choose joy. That sounds good to me." And I never understood that your brain fires emotion and it doesn't distinguish between physical pain and emotional pain. Like, I didn't know any of that stuff. And so it was so eye-opening within our relationship to start actually tuning in to what was happening for each of us emotionally. And for me, even sexually, I think I had become a performer. Like, I knew how to get pleasure and I knew how to give pleasure, but very much on a performance level, not an emotional level. Like, I was pretty guarded for a long, long time and didn't even know how to get there. And so a lot of tools that we've developed that we have put into our master classes and our book is about these really basic tools, because I think there's a ton of people out there like me who just we're not ever taught how to tune in emotionally to ourselves. And if we don't tune in emotionally to ourselves, we can't communicate that to our partner. We are not even communicating it to ourselves because we just kind of bypass it. We don't even understand. I think if we had the machinery that we could all have in our house to plug up our brains and go, oh, look, what's firing today? We would be shocked in a way, but we'd also be better educated. Like, oh, look at that. I'm dealing with a ton of fear. Didn't even know it. And, we don't have that. We don't do that unless you're in a laboratory. But it's like we do have the ability to tune in ourselves. We just don't know how. And so some of our tools are super basic as far as helping in that area. And it's been a fun journey, like going down the road with other couples on this and being able to really teach these things. People are like, whoa, man, that is really mind-blowing, just because I think we fight over logistics and we take each other into the courtroom all the time in our marriages, where it's like, I want to prove that I'm right and I want to prove that you're wrong. So let's go into the courtroom and fight it out. We'll get a judge and a jury. And, as we always say, the judge may go, you're correct, but you always lose in the end, right? Both people lose. Like, you leave the courtroom just bleeding, even if you are the one who feels like I'm right and I proved it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my listeners have heard my husband and I say it over and over and over again. If I win or if he wins, we both lose.
Yeah.
So when we come at, any kind of situation, whether it's a big decision for our life or it's just deciding how to interact with each other because one of us is more tender in that particular day, it's more of a collaborative process. So we've got to look at this we have a mentor that we really have loved working with over the years. Her name is Annie Lala. And one of the things that we've learned from her and just continue to lean into over the years is that at any given moment, one of us is more resourced than the other. And so, like the dishwasher story, in that moment, you saying thank you, you're in a sense more resourced because he's having his moment. Like, oh, that's a jab. That hurts. That's painful. So you have the wherewithal. You have the resources enough to zoom out a little bit eventually and question, something's not adding up here. And the way that I've been going about this historically is leading to more pain and disconnection and hurt and all these things. So let's opt to do this a little bit differently. And so, like, in any given moment, there's one person that potentially can do that for the couple and kind of bring that broader perspective and be the reminder, the person who reminds the two of you that we're on the same team and I love you and we're doing this thing together and I'm not here to hurt you. And if that's what's happening, then let's talk about that. Let's get back into harmony. And like, my husband and I, we don't argue very much at all. We kind of bicker a little bit here and there, and it's a little bit more playful because we quickly remind ourselves like what we're doing and yada, yada, yada. But we had a moment last night, like just totally, he did a thing, he made a decision, and it just poked all the like the exact wounds that I haven't. I've done lots of excavating. I've done lots of healing on, whether it's, previous abandonment father stuff, or if it's, previous partnerships where I trusted, but they weren't worthy of my, I like say worthy of my trust. They did bad things. They made bad decisions. And of course I played a role in that, but it definitely left wounding and hurting and all those things. And it just happened to be like the perfect storm of this little thing and that little thing and this little thing that added up to, I need to panic. And this morning, I just wanted to be mad. Like, I just wanted to be really upset and in my hurt and in my feelings. And I could see what I could see what I was doing. And I just like needed to have my moment. Like, let me just ride this out. I'm not attacking you. I'm not yelling at you or any of those things. And the reason why I chose to marry this man, this one, is because he sat next to me while I was in the bathtub and he said, I'm just going to listen to you. I know that you're hurting and I don't want that. That's never my intention. So I'm going to sit here and I want you to know that I don't need to be understood and I don't need you to hear me. And I'm not going to get defensive. I just want to be here because I know your heart is hurting. And I'm just like, thank you. And I hate you. And it's really like, it's like a little bit of everything, because I'm like, this is why I married you. I married you because this is how we do conflict. Like a good marriage or a good relationship, like a healthy relationship, isn't void of these things. It's not void of the conflict. It's not void of any of those things. It's, I think, the way that people go about trying to support each other and love each other and bringing it back to, we're on the same team, and being able to like do that, the emotional hygiene work, I guess I could, for lack of better terms there, and things like, you two have discovered over the years with connection codes, and and it's kind of wild because there was a time before, I met my husband and, in my 20s, where I'm like, oh, I just got to change the person out. Like, like this isn't working. So like, it's probably because we aren't a good fit, versus what can I actually take responsibility for here? What's me? Like we have the joke where I'm like, well, if it's a problem, it's you. Like if it's everywhere in your life, it's you. And so, we playfully joke with each other and like, oh, if you're like literally everything is burning to the ground, everything, like this is like a little personal solo journey. It's not everybody else's responsibility to come try to put you back together and fix your things for you and all of that. So, how great that, I think, and over time, I realized those things and then have been able to create a platform where we get to have these conversations so that hopefully more people can hear, like, you're not broken. Let's just look at these things differently. You're not broken, and your relationship's not a lie, and your love it has always been real. Your family is worth fighting for. It's not just stick it out and it's always so hard. Like, let's literally start doing some things differently.
Yeah. Love
So
that.
let's talk about the things that people can do differently. Cause I've had Jordan on, my husband. I've had him on a number of times and we've talked about the things that we've done differently. And so we've got like our like little handful of things that, but we're still working on it. Right. So we're a year and a half into marriage. So, of course we're experts now. That is a joke. 5.5, working on 6 years being together. And we started our relationship in our 30s. So at 30, and are going into, starting our family and everything at in our mid 30s. And so we waited for a certain level of maturity. We waited, and I laugh when I laugh to myself when I say that. I'm like, am I there yet? But we did wait. And there's so many people that start their family and start their relationships much younger, and then find themselves in these relationships and with these families, and they feel so lost because they essentially grew up together and were never given the resources, the tools, so it's like, how do, for the single people, it's like, how do I do this differently in the next relationship? And for people who've been in relationships, are like, is it too far gone? Let's dig into, some of the things that you both uncovered and discovered in your relationship, and that are just transforming people's ways of intimacy, of connection with each other, of harmony and peace in their families and their relationships.
Yeah, I love that. And I love what you just shared in the vulnerability of just sharing what happened last night. And
Yeah.
then you this morning, because as your listeners, I imagine a large majority just heard that story and went, okay, I want my husband to sit next to me when I'm in the bathtub and just make space for what I'm going through.
Yeah.
So for those listeners who are now going, please, please, please tell me how to do that, how to create that kind of relationship. That is what we have discovered through the connection codes.
Yeah.
And part of it is being able to hear each other. Like there's such a miss on that. And also to realize emotion happens to you. So whatever all the stuff last night that was triggered, you didn't decide to feel that way. You didn't decide to feel so hurt that even waking up this morning, you were still feeling that hurt. So to understand, emotion happens to you. So what do we do next in this relationship where we want to feel heard, not judged, not fixed, not, stepped around or shoved to the side, but we really want someone, our partner, to sit with us and hear the pain that we're experiencing and the pain that involved them, right? And that's the other ingredient. So often we just jump to being defensive, or that whole, I didn't mean to say that, or I didn't mean to hurt you, as though that's going to make it all okay. And so take it away, babe.
Well, and one of the things I try to emphasize to people, because nobody starts out with that plan. 24 hours before our wedding, Phyllis and I were excited about happily ever after. 48 hours after our wedding, we were stunned as to what the heck just happened and what did we just sign up for. We figured it'd be like 50, 60, 70 years. So it's like, well, crap, this is already not what we wanted. And so that's true for every couple I've ever met. I've never been to the wedding, where they say, well, we'll be in love for 6 months, maybe 2 years, and then we'll dissipate into some level of blondness. I've never been to that wedding. I don't think it exists.
And just live the rest of our days.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
My roommate, my husband.
Right. Yeah. And so people don't need better intentions, and they don't need more effort. People are exhausted already. They need better tools. And I love it that you said that, Alexa, resources and tools. So the connection codes are all about tools that people know what to do next. One of the protocols that startled me just a few years ago, looking at the research, that humans don't experience an emotion for more than 19 seconds unless it's reactivated. And it can be reactivated a lot of different ways, including by your partner or your friend or your mom or your neighbor. So when we learn how to process that emotion in 19 seconds, which is where we live now, which stuns me. The reason we're so passionate about the connection codes is because we live this now. We had no idea that it was even possible. Our tense moments rarely ever last more than 30 seconds, which if you had said that to me 25 years ago, I probably would have punched you in the face, because I would have thought you were making fun of me. Like you were just being like, this could take 30 seconds, buddy, because we took 3 days or 3 weeks to sort through conflicts. And now to do that in 20, 25, 30 seconds blows my mind that it's even possible.
Well, it's interesting that you kind of gave, in a very vulnerable way, the story of how it played out for you guys this morning. And, is it Jordan? Is that right?
Yeah.
I don't think Jordan probably even knows about that research. Like, just give her 19 seconds and we're going to get to the other side of this, right? Most of us don't understand that research, but basically that's what he did with you. He gave you the space where you now felt heard, which means this emotion was able to be processed by you, and then you were able to release it out of your body. And it is so amazing. Just understanding the science behind emotion makes things, it's like all the aha moments. We go, wow, that's incredible. One of the things we teach is the difference between why did you say that, or why did you do that, versus what happens for you. So that's one of the things we say. Take why out of your relationship, out of your conversation with each other. Why puts the other person on defense? They feel like they have to prove something. They feel accused of something. But if you go, hey, babe, what's happening for you? Then, and even last night, if Jordan had done that with you last night, you might have gone who knows where in that conversation. You might have mentioned your dad. You might have mentioned abandonment. You might have mentioned a past relationship with George. Who knows what would have come out in that moment. But it's that question, what's happening that it's
Yeah.
like our body responds to that. We slow ourselves down when someone says what's happening. And versus why speeds everything up, why immediately puts us in this,
And
I have to
reactivates the
defend.
emotion.
Yeah, it reactivates
Yeah.
the emotion, and we feel like we have to prove the worthiness of that emotion. But the question, what happens, draws you to and in to that situation. And so then you're able to feel heard with each other. And I think that's a big thing. You know, people will say, well, he's a really good listener. And it's like, well, how do we define that? You know, often we think if we just sit there and don't say a word, or just like, I'm just going to stare at you the whole time you're talking, we think that's being a good listener. Well, that's not, because what the person's receiving is what's called a still face. Credible science on that. And that is actually not, I don't even know what you're thinking. So I don't think you're listening to me. You're probably thinking about the ball game that's going on in the other room. And so we teach this basic stuff that you've got to be audible. You've got to be an audible listener. You've got to respond with what we call the ooh, which is kind of a title. It's more an audible, like, oh, yeah, okay, all right, uh-huh. Like it's something that the other person can hear, and that stimulates their brain to go, oh, okay, this person's listening to me.
Yeah, well, what the research showed is if I'm oohing Phyllis, it actually tickles the pleasure center of her brain. If I'm silent, I could be completely cued into her. I mean, totally focused, listening to every word that she's saying. But what the research showed was that if I'm silent, it tickles the pain center of her brain. So she's experiencing pain. There's three emotional pains: hurt, sad, and lonely. So she's probably feeling lonely in that moment, even though I'm sitting right here beside her and I'm looking at her the whole time, but it actually is activating the pain center of her brain. Whereas if I'm audible, it tickles the pleasure center of the brain.
And then the other thing, sometimes as listeners, we think our job is to fix. And so you've shared a pain, and the fix response is, oh no, you're okay, babe. You know, I know that happened a long time ago. And that we go into this fix, like, I'm going to encourage you with my words, which actually does the opposite. It really communicates that what you just shared isn't even valid, and you're kind of stupid for sharing it, and you're immature for sharing it.
Felt it.
And you shouldn't have felt it. And, you know, you should have been, that was a long time ago. You should be over it by now. So there's judgment in that. And yet the person who thinks they're being a good listener is all actually doing all these things that in your brain is communicating you're not a good listener. And, you know, with a lot of couples we work with, they'll say, one of them will say, well, he doesn't ever hear me. And the husband goes, I hear every word you say. And it's not about the audible, you know, like her ears are working, his ears are working. It's about the experience. So do I feel heard in this relationship? And if you don't feel heard, that's what matters. And so it's those ways of understanding each other and understanding what happens in the brain, what happens in the emotion region of your brain, where you're like, you're kidding. That actually communicates pain. I thought I was doing a good thing by just silently staring at you when you're talking to me. I thought that was a good thing. And it's like just science, right? We have so much technology now. We can just see it. We can see that, oh, your pain region is actually firing when there's complete silence. So a lot of these tools, once you see them and hear them, you're like, well, those are really basic. And yet most of us don't know them. And so we complicate things a lot.
So I work with a wide range of people. You know, they come into our coaching programs, and it's a lot of sex education, and it's a lot of varying tools and different things that they can use to, you know, to get in and to get back into connection. And some of them I think are very similar to some of the tools that you guys have too, like you're just our own little flavor.
Yeah.
And so wide range, you know, people who are with us for a long period of time, I watch them completely transform who they are and how they're showing up in relationship and as an individual in life. You know, who they are week 1 versus who they are 6 months down the road, you know. And where was I recently? I mean, I was just in New Orleans. I was home hosting a women's retreat. And I actually, this might have been this is kind of like just I think this is where this idea is coming from, is just being surrounded by people from where I'm from, which is very different than being surrounded by the community that I've cultivated very intentionally here in Austin. So when I go home, I'm like, oh, this is how this goes. This is how, you people do this.
Mhm.
How are you all still together? How? But they must get something right, because a lot of them are together for a long time. But anyway, I had some newbies at my retreat, and I was and I just happened to be, in my home environment, which is, the paraphrase Ram Dass quote, that's, if you think you're so evolved, go spend a week with your family. I'm reminded of all of the things that I still get to work on in this life whenever I go brush up against, like sister and mom and
Mhm.
cousins and all the things. But anyway, um, some of those people that I would say, like, if I were dropped into the middle of, let's say, a bunch of young women that maybe I went to high school with, maybe a couple years ahead of me, maybe a couple years behind me, um, if I were just like dropped into the middle of a conversation with them and I brought up some of the things that you were just sharing, I imagine that some of the responses would be, I could never get him to do that. Or
Mhm.
I could say these things, like how, I could say this, and then the response would be, more of, I can't do anything right, or I say this and you interpret that. So, like, how is that my fault? Like, a lot of pushing the blame back over onto them, leaving them feeling like they're the kind of, more or less, this illusion that they're the only one that's interested in working on their relationship, and feeling hopeless, and feeling like they a lot of times just have to work with whatever their male counterpart is bringing into the relationship. And then, of course, this ensues their own emotional cycles, where he feels like she's all over the place and whatever. And so he's just at least this steady, like, I'm not, this, what you see is what you get kind of thing. It's this really unfortunate dynamic. And so I guess some of my curiosities are for, let's say, women specifically, a large population of our, or a large group of our listeners are women in relationships. Um, how would you suggest them to go about, like, is this like a both parties have to be on board to do this thing? Or is there some way that, let's say in a heterosexual relationship, she can take on some of these things and kind of help to massage this into their relationship so that he sees the benefit and then gets on board? Does that make sense? I think it
Oh,
makes
yeah.
sense.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, we have a private practice here outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and Zoom with people all over the world, which is a really cool experience
Mhm.
because often when you develop tools, they work in a
Mhm.
Western, American society. And with these tools that we have developed, they work in every language
Right.
all over the world,
Yeah.
which is incredible,
Mhm.
just as a side note. But we also know that if only one partner understands what's happening and develops and really masters these tools themselves,
Yeah.
they see incredible change within their family, within their kids, within their spouse, within even relationships at work with girlfriends. It's like we get, emails every day of people just telling those kinds of testimonials, because once you figure this out for yourself, because it's the human condition, it's not just some theories that
Right.
we've come up with, it's all through science. And
Yep.
you kind of go way back in it and you go, wow, this so totally makes sense. And when you start using them, then you see the results, and the people around you do too. They begin to ask, like, what is this, like,
Mhm.
what has happened? And it doesn't take long, because they
Right.
all of a sudden see you responding in a different way, reacting in
Mhm.
a different way, even wording things differently. Like, instead of "why did you say that," to say, "so what happens for you when I say that?" It's like you get a
Right.
different response, and the people begin to notice. And so we have found that it's incredibly powerful, even when only one person is involved in the tools.
Yeah, and the power of this, just from a macro perspective, the reason the connection codes work is because they're based on the human condition. They're not just a
Hmm.
theory or a philosophy, a personality profile. This is what is already inside of me, inside of you, inside of every human on the planet. And it's how we're born to operate. And we're faith based. We believe that there's a designer behind all this, even if there's not, if there's no God and this is all just evolutionary. This is the human condition. The connection codes are based on how humans function already. We say that we're the founders of the connection codes. We're not the inventors. We're not the creators. We discovered it and then we wrote a book about it, but we did not invent it. The connection codes existed long before I was born. They've always existed throughout human history because this is how humans function. We mentioned earlier that, if I don't feel seen and heard by Phyllis, we're not going to connect deeply. Well, that's not because that's in chapter 3 of our book. That's the human condition. And I didn't decide that. That was already true. And the connection codes have spread to over 60 nations now. So it's very, very cross-cultural. And it just works, again, simply because it's based on the human condition. And it has nothing to do with religious tenets or anything of that nature. It's just what happens for humans.
Yeah, totally. I mean, as I continue my path, I grew up Catholic, and my husband grew up with his grandparents as pastors, of a charismatic Christian evangelical, like slaying the spirit, holy everything. That was where he grew up, and we both, individuated, and we're like, we're gonna make spirituality for ourselves. And it's we've talked about it a couple times on the show, where we find ourselves now just very curious about what faith actually means to us and what it would look like if, instead of having those things put upon us, if we were to forge our own relationship with them. And it's especially prevalent for us now because we're going to start a family, and like by December. And so the questions of like, how do we want to raise this little one and all of that. And so even as you're speaking, like the tenants, they're legit for a reason, So whether you look at them and are like, I believe in God and Jesus and all the things, or if you just look at it and are like, wow, that's really wise, they're wise and repeated for a reason. So I'm definitely with you there.
Wow, I love
Well,
that. And, I think with even starting a family, you go, you know what? I want my child to be
right.
emotionally intelligent,
Yeah.
and I need to figure this stuff out so I know which way to go. And,
Yeah.
our kids, we have 4 children, going on 12 grandchildren. And, it's incredible to be able to use these tools with our kids and our grandkids, and we can talk so openly and really deeply about our emotion, and we can just come to the table with it, that it's so we're able to say, wow, I felt really hurt by what you said, and it's received. It's not defended. It's like,
Yeah.
I feel heard by my kids, and I feel so seen by my kids and my grandkids. But it's been quite the journey, right? We've been doing this. And so sometimes people say, okay, we've already made too many mistakes. And it's like, oh, thankfully we're older and we have grown children. And so we're able to go, oh, we didn't figure this out early on. We figured this all out in the last decade. And so these kind of tools allow you to go back in and go, hey, I think I really missed some things with you. And to be able to have those conversations with your kids is incredible. And, and I've been able to have, even with my siblings I was the youngest of 8, so they're all older, and to be able to have these conversations even within my family has been really something. And to be able to just have the tools, like to hear each other and not try to fix each other. It's all such powerful stuff. But I think our greatest passion, and I definitely feel that for you and Jordan, is to go, okay, wow, we're about to bring a little human into this world. And we want to be able to teach them to process their emotion. Like, oh my word, so much dysregulation gets us so off track with so many things in life.
Yeah.
And so that's so huge.
Yeah, we tell people all the time, your greatest role model is going to be living in your house. If you watch your 6-month-old, you watch your 12-month-old, they know how to human. They know how to be authentic. They always present authentically. They always present vulnerably, and you're always present with them. That's what humans are coded. That's why we call it the connection codes. We're coded. We're hardwired this way. And then somewhere along the way, most of us get knocked off course. We get reprogrammed. We never get recoded. This coding is still within us. We just forgot it.
And I think it's for a variety of reasons. And I'm sure like y'all agree too. Like some of our habits and the ways that we are that are in the way of connection at one point or another served me very well, protected me, moved me through the world, but, and I look at it now as, okay, so I learned how to be hard, and I learned how to take care of myself, and I learned how to do these things because I didn't have a father figure. I didn't know what that was like. And I can be a victim to that. And I could use that as an excuse as to, well, I just am the way that I am, or I can choose to do this differently. I can choose to heal and to work on that and know that there, healing isn't linear and there is no like end goal. You've arrived, you're healed, congratulations. Like it's something that it comes in layers of like when it's affecting me and when it's very present and maybe when it's not. And I imagine having a little person is going to for sure show me all of the areas that I have not touched yet or have not looked at yet, you know, and then as I've gotten and down the line into maturity and adulthood and all of that, then it's like, okay, well, how do I actually want to operate? Because this did serve me then, but this isn't serving me now when I want to be in connection with my husband, when I want to be in connection with the first father I'll ever spend an extended period of time with will actually be him. And so, you know, it's so multifaceted, and I look at the habits and the different things and I'm like, okay, thank you. I want to say you had a sacred role in my life and I appreciate you for that. And I actually thank you. And I don't need you right now. I don't need you. You are inhibiting me from being able to be in connection, being able to be vulnerable, being able to hear another person and what they've got, you know, to bring to the table and all of that. And so, you know, I kind of point that out just like for anyone who just to just point that perspective out is like at some point the habits and the things that you have like might have had a sacred role in this process. And it doesn't mean like, oh, I need to beat myself up and I'm so wrong or bad for having these things. It's like, okay, well, just see it for what it is. And you get to then choose at times in the future, like make different decisions, you know. And if you've got 19 seconds, okay, we'll be with the fuck you, I hate you for 19 seconds and then go, what do I choose now? You know, so if 19 seconds is going to go by and it's like, I'm going to grit my teeth and go, you know what? I'm going to choose love instead. Let's do it.
That's so powerful. I mean, it is
Yeah.
those moments, right? I think it is crazy. 19 seconds. You go, that's not long.
Yeah.
But we so often are so reactionary that it is 19 seconds. It's like, I can't hold my breath that long. I'm about to explode. And so that's part of just what we developed this whole masterclass around is how do we do that? How do we stay in the moment for 19 seconds? How do we not lose it?
Right.
How do we slow ourselves down? You know, it's almost like the deep breathing kind of idea. Like, how do we slow ourselves down to be present for the other person and to not be reactionary, but to really hear the wounding, to hear the pain that the other person is experiencing? And yeah, it is not just a magic pill. It's definitely it takes the knowledge. I think it starts with the knowledge, understanding the science behind it. Then when you see it play out, you're like, oh my gosh, that really worked. And then you go, okay, I'm in, you know, I'm going to get really, really good at this. And we were so determined, like, even though we have a private practice, we know we're so limited with how many people we can see and how many people we can teach this to. So that's part of why the book was first and the master classes, is because there's got to be a way to get this out without people having to sit with us to work through and learn these tools. And, you know, we're super excited just to be able to present that even to your audience, and to be able to give you guys, we've got a discount code for you guys. If they go to our website, connectioncodes.co/thatsexchick, they'll get a free download of some of our tools and a video teaching the tools. So that's all free. But if they want to get the masterclass and they just put in sex chick, they'll get 20% off. So we wanted to make it easy for your audience just to really find these tools and to get some free material and to get them on the road. You know, this is quite the journey. So
amazing. That is an incredible gift. And thank you for that. I love whenever they've got a clear path to whatever whatever the next step is, and that's easy for them. I would love, before we round this podcast out, a couple of things. So we've gotten one big tool, like in case anyone didn't pull it out, didn't piece this together. One of the biggest tool that we've conversed about is, well, you've shared it with instead of saying why, it's what's happening for you. At least I've gathered that much since we've been talking. And I am curious if there's another one or two that really stand out, that if someone were to implement it today, they would see the little light bulb would go off. This is, we're onto something. And then the second thing that I would love, and y'all can maybe lead us there, is how this translates into sexual intimacy.
Mm.
Like if sex is not really happening, or it's happening in this very performative way, or it's like, every Tuesday at 2, which I think is a great thing to have on your calendar. However, if you want to make sure that there's also emotional connection in the mix, which makes it even better, I would love to hear, like how this really weaves into being more sexually satisfied.
Wow. Well, can I start with the two and then go
Yes.
back to the one? Okay. And we need to do a whole nother podcast just about the sex aspect of it. But I think a huge one. So, and we actually have a master class on just sex and how to take these tools and implement them into your sex life. But I'll give you just a little bit of just a little teaser for that it's been so transformative for us. And that is to be able to share the emotion behind it. So what I mean is for Glenn to be able to come to me and go, "Oh, babe, I feel so much joy." We call them sex dates, which happens to be tonight for us. So yay. Yes, it's a good day. But for him to be able to come to me at any point and go, "Oh, I'm feeling so much sexual joy." And then I tune in, I'm like, "Oh, babe, what's happening with the joy?" And then he'll go, "Well, I've just been thinking about you and I would just love to play with you tonight." And I hear his emotion, which draws him to me. And there's times our life is pretty full, pretty crazy, and he may be feeling sexual joy, but in that moment, there's really not a reality. We've got people coming over tonight, babe. They won't stay till midnight. I'm kind of checked out by 10 p.m. So midnight really pushes me. And yet I haven't rejected him. I've heard his emotion. I've heard his joy. And it brings us together, right? It's not a complicated, in the early days, it was like that whole, how do you connect sexually? It's awkward. Like so often it's, do you want to have sex tonight? And, there's these questions that are really not true to what's happening for the other person. So when he can just express his sexual joy, then I can hear that. Or he'll express his sexual loneliness. "Oh, babe, I'm feeling some sexual loneliness." And I tune into that. Like, "Oh, what's happening with the loneliness?" "Well, we've just been super busy and, we've not even been going to bed at the same time. I just really miss you. I just love to hold you, love to play with you." Then I don't feel pressure. I just hear him. I hear his sexual loneliness. And then I'm like, "Well, babe, you're right. We've been super busy. Let's look at the calendar. Our sex dates this week, we've always got a weekly sex date, but that doesn't mean we're not sexually active in between. And so we'll just look at the calendar." And it's not this painful game that a lot of couples play, like the hints. "Well, he's been hinting and I've been ignoring." It's just laying it out, being emotionally connected with what is happening sexually, emotionally. That's huge. And then other times once you're tuned into your own emotion, there's also the ability, that bridge that can go to, "Ooh, I feel a lot of emotional fear about our sex date this week." "Oh, babe, what's happening with the fear?" "Well, I just don't feel top notch. My leg is hurting. And I just feel like I'm going to be a disappointment tonight because I'm just kind of stuck in this pain cycle right now." And it's like we show up super authentic. I'm not performing. I'm not pretending. I'm being really genuinely real. And he knows how to make space for that. And that has been a huge, it's like when you have that kind of emotional connection sexually, there's such safety in that. And the freedom in that, and the safety that I feel allows me then to have those moments, like the multiple orgasms come. For a lot of women, they shut it off because they feel guilt that it takes them so long to even orgasm compared to their spouse. Well, that is something you can process. You can talk about. You can say, "Oh, I feel so much guilt. It's taking so long." Well, when he hears that, so often we hear this from guys that are like, "Oh gosh, I love it. Like, please take longer. I love seeing you like this. I love playing with you. I love bringing you to an orgasm." But women often don't know to even process that emotion.
Right.
So then they shut themselves down. And that often the reason more women don't have multiple orgasms is because they feel so much guilt just getting to the first one. So they don't just relax into it to have multiple orgasms. But when you're able to just talk about the emotion, to be able to process the emotion and let go of it, which is part of the processing, is verbalizing the emotion. Find it, verbalize it, and then release it from your body. then your body relaxes. And then sexually, you're able to have show much more fun, and it becomes extremely playful because you've been able to be really honest for yourself. Find yourself first is the big one. And for a lot of us, we get stuck in that. We get stuck in the fear cycle and we don't communicate it.
Yeah.
And so that affects us. We just start to perform. It just becomes this performance, get it done as quick as possible.
Oh.
And we don't feel safe to do it otherwise.
Which leads us into question number one, which is one of our biggest tools. It's called the core emotion wheel. And again, this is all just came out of research, figuring out what happens for humans. And humans have 5 neural regions that fire emotions. That's true for every human on the planet. And there are 8 core emotions within those 5 regions: anger, fear, guilt, hurt, loneliness, sad, shame, and joy. And again, that's true for every human. So there are no exceptions to this. This is just what's happening. It's brain chemistry. Well, the core emotion wheel is designed to retrain us to recognize the 8 core emotions. And we say retrain because a 12-month-old does this really well. The 12-month-old always conveys exactly what's happening for them in the moment. Well, we get knocked off course, so we don't do that anymore. So the core emotion wheel experience is designed as a 4-minute tool for 2 people, 2 minutes per person. And that's the free giveaway that Phyllis talked about. And we encourage all of your listeners, just go. It's free. Just go. You'll be shocked by what this does for you as an individual, and then for your relationships. And it's all relationships, not just partnered pairs. But the core emotion wheel is designed to retrain your brain to recognize the core emotion that's already firing. It's already there. We're not inventing it. We're not creating it. It's already there. But it helps you to be able to identify it. Then you can process it. And the vast majority of us don't even know that these emotions are happening. So we don't, and human behavior is pushed by emotion. And if we don't process the emotions, we end up making some really poor decisions, really poor behavior. But the problem is not the poor behavior. I mean, that is a problem. I'm not condoning or agreeing with the poor behavior, but the problem is the emotion that was unprocessed that led to the poor behavior. And as long as we don't process that emotion, the best you're going to do is bite down on a stick and just grit your way through it. Whereas if you process the emotion that's behind it, then you actually are able to make smarter choices. And we know that too, just the science of that. The limbic system is what is the central command center for the emotions. The limbic system engages before the cortexes. The cortexes handle the executive functions of the brain: thought, reason, logic, etc. And so most of us make poor choices because the limbic system is flooded. And it's not because we're stupid. It's because the limbic system is flooded, and we actually become a dumber version of ourselves because the cortex is flooded. It's not because we're dumb. It's because we're human, because the limbic system is flooded. As long as the limbic system is flooded, you are not going to be able to make good executive functioning. And that, again, that's true for every human on the planet. And I behave poorly when my emotions are unprocessed, not because I'm a bad person, not because I don't adore Phyllis. It's because my limbic system is flooded, and now I present as a dumber version of myself, and I make poor choices.
I love a good emotion wheel. You know, like, I mean, so many people think that they're processing one thing when if they just go a little bit deeper, it's so much more nuanced than that. And then their ability to actually be met in it. And for the other person, it's like, oh, well, if you're just sad, well, I guess just go do something to make yourself happy. Goodness. But if you're really dealing with despair, you're really dealing with something, if you're really dealing with grief, well, then we're going to look at that we're going to look at that differently. And then, and so I love that. I love that piece. I love when people can get really, really connected with what they're actually feeling versus, I know they're all stemming from the core, but usually those core, they've got, a couple to a few maybe in their language that they even know. And so, to get even a little bit more into what's going on for someone and to be able to support them moving through that, which I was afforded that opportunity this morning with my husband. And he would have done that for me. And he was doing that for me last night. I just needed space because my mind was spiraling and I was retriggering myself by going into memory and and so I knew very clearly what was happening because I've dealt with anxiety and panic attacks and things like that. That started in college, I think, and very, very rarely happens now. But when when it comes, I'm like, okay, like you're pulling out all the tools, they're laying completely out. And you're right. Like, I mean, I was doing a pretty good job of triggering myself and calming myself down. And then just riding the waves, because then it would tug me back in and I ride the waves. But it's one thing if I'm putting myself there. It's a different thing that if Jordan comes in and tries to fix it or make it stop or
Right.
soothe me,
Right.
and then he kind of becomes the thing that's having me flop back into it. And so we actually just needed the space for me to fully calm myself down and to have my nervous system settle, which still, even in the midst of it, was still very sweet. Like seeing how I used to have those episodes and experiences in the past and how people would react to me, and I would shame myself and feel shame from them and feel guilty for doing it and feel dramatic and over the top and all of these things. Now I am partnered with someone that's like, I will do whatever you need, even if you can't tell me what you need right now. So I'm going to do a little bit of this. And I want you to know that I love you. And I want you to know that this was not the intention. This was not this impact is not what I intended.
Mm.
And I'm sorry that you're hurting, So he's not like, I'm so sorry, I'm wrong. And now he's not
Right.
now victimizing himself and taking it and putting the spotlight on himself. He's making those things very separate, gave me that space. And then this morning it was, I know that you're feeling these things, and if there's more. And one of my favorite things that he does, even though it drives me a little bit cray in the moment, but we both have learned that it's the appropriate response is, what else?
Oh, yes. Love it.
Mm-hmm.
What else? He's like, I want to get that well all the way dry, like all the things out. Let's pull it all out. What else? What else? What else? Until it's complete. And then it just gets to be then. Like it just gets to be complete for the moment. And I was, even in the, like, I had traveled, I was in New Orleans and I was hosting retreat and all these things. And so we hadn't been sexually intimate in over a week because we were both traveling. He was in Ohio, this whole thing. And so here I am in my head and I'm like, and now you fucked up our sex later. Like now I don't want to have, I'm not available for any of it. But we know the tricks. So there he was with me in the bathroom. Like, this is what it takes. This is
Yeah.
what it takes in order to, because the alternative is that the well didn't get all the way dry and he didn't show up in that way, maybe partially, but maybe not all the way, but maybe in some way, maybe he was still holding on like a little bit of defense or holding on a little bit of, he needs to be understood in order to feel complete, and all of that. But he didn't do that, but if he did do those things and if he did operate in that way, if sex would have happened later, there would have been a part of it that I would have had to kind of push through in order to. And I would have told myself, sex will lead to us being more connected. Sex, because we do leverage it as a tool at times, though I don't prefer it that way. I prefer to go in with, we already feel clear and I'm still hurting and I'm here because this is what I opt in for. This is the relationship that I've devoted my life to, and this matters to me. And even though like the little girl in me is really hurt still and is figuring herself out, and I'm tending to her, she's my responsibility. Like I still in this moment want to be in connection, and in physical intimacy, even though I want to fight you. I know what's probably best right now is that I actually let you in, let you touch me, regulate with me, instead of me only having to do it on my own. Because I do have a willing partner that wants to breathe with me, wants to give me the presence, wants to do all those things. He wants to be my hero. And I know that. I know that at the top of everything, that's all that man wants to do is like be the hero of the family, like be the one that provides me with so much happiness and joy and provides a great life for our family and our future family and all of that. And he's a human, and sometimes he doesn't get it. It's not right or wrong. Sometimes it just misses the mark a little bit, like his intention's one thing and the impact is so mixed with so many other things that like he may or may not even be aware of. And so, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that this work even exists, because what I just described was never my reality previously. you know, like it has taken two people individually committed to the work for sure.
Yeah.
And then I have noticed at times if I make some shifts and I make some changes, and I usually use the term I become the muse, where I'm like I'm inspiring to him. He gets on board real quick because he's like, oh, this makes her happy, and I like happy Alexa. She's sexually available. I'll do that too. What's the words? Like he's got a notebook. He's writing them down.
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
and obvious you guys have done a ton of work. And,
Mm-hmm.
that is for us, that ton of work took absolutely forever for us. And, that's part of what inspired us with our oldest daughter to write the book and then to create the master classes, which one of them is actually on parenting because she is the one who's she's expecting baby number 6. And so parenting is a huge part of her heart. And she wanted to go, I want these tools to change parenting out there in the world. And but it starts with just the foundation, understanding. That's what we call it, the foundation masterclass, is understanding the tools of emotion, like how to get there, but we had to simplify it. Most people, like, for example, our modules are less than 30 minutes, including a answer these questions for yourself moment. And we made them shorter because we know we just are in a busy life right now, everyone on this planet. And so no one wants to take very long to learn much. And so we wanted it to be simple. We wanted every time for you to be able to take something away, like why versus what happens. Like we want everyone at the end to go, okay, I got it. I got this thing. I'm going to do it for the next week. And then I'll watch another one. And we had to do that for ourselves, probably more for me, because I'm not a researcher. I'm not the scientist. I'm not the reader. Like, give me a great book, but not a self-help book. But Glenn is the guy, he's the researcher, he's the scientist. But I'm like, make it simple, babe, make it simple. It's got to be simple. And that is what we so much desired. And that's what we want for your audience too. It's just, there's got to be ways to learn this stuff easily and quickly. And you got to see change. Like, that's the thing too, like the why versus what happens. Just implement that starting today. And you'll be shocked how in a week, you'll be like, oh my gosh, I stopped saying it. And I said what happens over and over with people, and it worked. It made such a difference. I can't believe the great conversations I've had this week by just changing that one thing. And so that's what we went after with our master classes, was make the tools really simple so that you can get there quicker. And then you can have the stories like what you've shared, what you and Jordan have, and what y'all have worked so hard to get. And it all plays into your intimate relationship as well. When you have that safety, when you have that emotional connection, that you can get there. So that's really beautiful. I love your story.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. And I love y'all's story too. And congratulations on another grandbaby coming into the mix.
Yeah.
Because I imagine each time they come in, they've got their own, soul and ideas of the world and what they're gonna do. And it's like more opportunity to leverage the tools and see them played out in new and unique ways. And I'm definitely looking forward to taking some of the things that I've learned, through the years, including some of the things that we've spoken about on this show, and creating a completely different reality for our children in the future than either of us grew up with. And that feels really powerful and so so worth it. The work being so worth it. And to me equates as a life really well lived. So, and one that is very intentional and not just happening to us, and we're going through the motions, and we just got to get through this stage of life and then this stage of life, and like then we'll be happy. It's there's so much beauty and available, and happiness and joy and all of that available even right now, even if it's the hard part. So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you both so much for coming on, for giving this gift, for doing this work, for making it easy for our audience to find you and to lean into some of the work, the deeper work that you have done and have provided to the world. I'm just so grateful and appreciative. Is there any last thing before we put a bow on our show?
Well, you deserve connection, and that is huge. You deserve to be understood. And I think often we just think we're broken and don't realize, I think the big one is emotion happens to you. And so to figure out what is happening for you, And we're always so different. I mean, Glenn and I, 40 years later, we've been together 44 years. We're as different as we've always been. But now I can hear his experience, and he can hear mine without judgment.
Yeah.
And the things that I find joy in, sometimes he finds pain in, and that's okay. And we can celebrate who we are and the differences that we are.
Yeah, and just to remind people, as I said earlier, that you didn't end up where you didn't want to be on purpose. This is not because you're a bad person, a wrong person, a dumb person. We just haven't had the tools. We always
Yeah.
call it trying to put a nail into a board with a toothbrush. And people are wailing away on this nail, and they're like, it's not working, it's not working. Well, they have the wrong tool. It's not because they're bad people. It's not because they're not trying hard enough. They have the wrong tool. They have a toothbrush, and they're beating on this nail, and it's barely sticking into the wood just a little, but not really. And so they haven't had the right tools, the right materials to build their house. And so then they end up in this house that's falling apart, and they're like, what happened?
Yeah.
What's wrong with us? Well, there's nothing wrong with you. You just did not know what you didn't know. And that's
Right.
our goal, is to just help people to get the information they need.
Yeah. And I'm sure you'll put it in the show notes, but just again, the reminder, connectioncodes.co/that sex chick will get you all those free. And then if you jump right into the masterclass, use the code sex chick to get 20% off.
I bet you love putting those codes together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sex chick and sex chick.
Yeah, it's
Very
good.
cute. It's very cute. Social media, Instagram does not like that. That's what my brand is called, but it's effective.
Yes.
It is
Yes.
effective. All right. Thank you again so much for coming on and for sharing your wisdom and sharing your time with all of our listeners. I greatly appreciate it, and I know that they greatly appreciate it as well.
Thank you, Alexa.
Thank you.
Right. And